Just before this session started, my laptop crashed with some kind of fatal error. It's working now on reboot, but if the screen turns black and it says that it's overheated, it's pretty much game over. So there's that. I'll have to restart and things, but we'll kind of talk amongst ourselves and it'll be fine. Good. Okay. Well, I'm going to get started because I do like making sure they're starting time. Joe, you can sneak in at the back there. I'll let you. That's great.
No heckling.
No heckling, exactly. Right, now then, what tends to happen is when I run sessions, people take photographs of the screen. You can totally do that, but if you go to this link here, goo.gl/MEA2HF, then you'll get these slides. All right. Also, I am on Twitter at DAJ although I don't tend to use Twitter that much these days. And I've tweeted out my slides. So if you want the slides, there's about 40 slides, one per minute, as it were. There's going to be some interaction. But if you want the slides, there they are. And I'm talking for longer than I need to, so you can write that down. There we go. goo.gl/MEA2HF. All right then, so this is me. I don't want to talk too much about myself. I want to talk about you. But this is me. You can find more about me on the internet. I wasn't lying when I said that I have worked in all of the sectors that you've worked in. I was a teacher, a senior leader. I worked for JISC in higher education. I worked for Mozilla, who make Firefox. And then I've been a consultant and co-op co-founder. Did a lot of work with City and Guilds in FE. I've done some work with Cambridge English, etc. So, and I've also set up a cooperative. Not the co-op that you go to. Not the co-op bank. A cooperative is when people join together in solidarity, and that's what I've done with some friends and former colleagues at Mozilla, and we've joined together to form a co-op, and I'm going to tell you more about that at the end if you're interested. So here's the things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to do a quick introduction where I'm going to ask for your input. Then we're going to be talking about digital literacies, which is the subject of my thesis. We're going to be talking about open badges, which is the reason I left formal education and went to work for a tech company. And then we'll be kind of coming to a conclusion as to how you can take what's going on in this session and then actually use it in your practice. So here we go. First of all, what I want you to do is to take a photo of something interesting with your mobile device. Now, I'm in front of you. You don't have to take a photo of me. You can take a photo of anything else in the room. I'd like you to edit it in some way. Anything you want, change it in some way. You could crop it. You could change the color of it and somehow put a filter on. You could draw on top of it and then send it to someone. If you don't want to tweet it out or put it on Facebook or Instagram, whatever, send it to a friend. Like, just do something with it. But if you're putting it on a public network, on something like that, do use the #IEdTech17 hashtag. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that right now. Just do what it says on the screen, however you want to do it. I'll do it too.
What's your Twitter handle again?
DAJ Belshaw. So here we go. Take my photo, gonna edit it. Opening my photo. Oh, what should I do? I'm gonna do an HDR scape. I'm gonna make it look crazy. I'm gonna export that to Twitter. And I'm going to put HDR stylized participants, if I can spell participants, at my session at IEdTech17. All right, when you've finished, you can just check the hashtag if you want to. You can see what other people are posting on there. Just search hashtag IEdTech17. You might not want to use Twitter, you might want to use something else. I've just realized I'm on airplane mode, so that's totally not going to work. There we go. And then once you've done all that, just take your phone down so I know you've done, and then we'll move on. Has that worked? Yes, that's mine done. Excellent. Put my phone down. tempted to do a live demo here. There's my thing I've just put out there. It's waiting for some more on there. It doesn't have to be Twitter, it could be something else. Great. All right then, so I'm just going to, if you're still doing it, still do it, that's great, that's fine. But I'm just going to call it just a halt there, just for the sake of time. We haven't got that much time today, if that's going to work. There we go. I haven't got that much time today. But the reason I've asked you to do that is it's a very practical demonstration of something which would have been remarkably different like 10 years ago, before kind of mobile phones. It's almost so banal to even not worth mentioning that, you know, before mobile phones came along, if you wanted to do what we've just done now, which is take a photograph, edit it, go and send it out to somebody, you wouldn't take less than a minute to do that. You'd take about 15 minutes to do it. You wouldn't bother doing it. You'd have to get a laptop out and take your SD card out and put it in and do all that kind of stuff. And what that means in practice is that you have different rhetorics of communication. You have different modes of discourse. Now, if I used that without giving you the practical example, you'd be like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about, Doug? But what I'm talking about are different channels have different effects, okay? So Clay Shirky, who some of you might have heard of, a media theorist, I think he's out in Shanghai at New York University, he said, and this is a quotation I use a lot, communications tools don't get socially interesting until they get technologically boring. And what he means by that is, when something is everywhere, all of a sudden it becomes socially interesting. Things don't get socially interesting until it's just obvious that join my Facebook group, or it's just obvious that just tweet that out with a hashtag. If I'd said those words 10 years ago when Twitter was brand new, you would, I mean, Joe and I were on Twitter 10 years ago and talking to each other, but I can remember running workshops and people were saying, this will never catch on, what's going on here? And if I'd said those words to you of like, take a photograph, edit it, send it out, first of all, hands would have gone up, how do I do this, what's going on, how do, you know, what is this thing that you're talking about? But as things become technologically boring, things start getting socially interesting because we can start using them in practice. So it's almost banal to point that out because it's so obvious to everybody. But it's not just texts that are written. When we're talking about digital literacies, we're not just talking about text, we're talking about every kind of media. We're talking about audio, we're talking about images, all of these things like emojis, like animated GIFs, all the things that we use to create. I read yesterday that emojis are the fastest growing language in the world ever. They're like the modern hieroglyphics. I think it was Julian Wood who was talking about that. But this is Sophie's podcast on the left-hand side, and this is my podcast on the right. So whereas Sophie's podcast is very professional and advanced and short, my podcast is almost the exact opposite of that, as anyone who's ever listened to it will attest. Now, they have different, even though they have the same format, they have different expectations. We're expecting people to consume them differently. You could consume Sophie's podcast during one commute. It would take you several commutes, a very long drive to consume the one on the right, and you might fall asleep along the way. But what they have are something in common. They have an RSS feed, and they have certain audio. We're expecting people to consume them in certain ways. But what I'm trying to get at here is that every time we're talking about a text on the internet, as I'm sure Ed will be talking about this afternoon, we're not necessarily talking about written stuff. We're talking about things which you listen to, things that you look at, things that you consume with your eyes. So everything has its own rhetorics and its own discourse, like I said. All right, let's think about the message that you've just sent out. I'm using Twitter here as an example because that's where I sent it out to. But let's think about what we're expecting people to do with that message once they received it. So does anyone want to share, perhaps I'll use the microphone for this bit, does anyone want to share where they sent their message out to? Is this on? Don't know. Maybe I'll just repeat the question. Joe? That's not on.
Do you want me to use the mic? Is that what you...
Well, I'm going to see if it works.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
1, 2. Okay. So what I... Okay.
That's not working.
So
Let's just abandon that.
I took a photo put it into Adobe Spark post, put it into Adobe Spark still.
Oh, it is working.
Yeah, put it into Adobe Spark post to put a filter on it, added some text, and then I tweet it out to my followers.
Okay, and when you tweet something out to your followers, what are the options that they've got? How can they interact with that?
So I put the hashtag in for the event. So obviously someone following that hashtag would see that tweet, or the people following the stuff I'm tweeting out in general will be able to see the tweet.
Yep.
Or later on after the conference, someone doing a search for that hashtag can look at the tweets.
And how can they interact in real time? Let's say they send it out, okay. I see your tweet, how can they interact with it?
Just by tapping on mention or reply, and then sending a reply back about that. They could, on Twitter that would be the main way.
They could retweet it.
They could retweet it. They could, if you were displaying on a wall, they could discuss it face to face in a room, that sort of thing.
They could like it. They could do all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that has there's certain things you expect people to do. Did anyone send it somewhere else apart from Twitter? You want to send it? Where do you send it?
I posted mine up on Instagram.
Okay.
And with the hashtag, and I've got 1 like.
Okay. So how can people interact with what you've just done on Instagram? What are you expecting people to do?
I'm expecting them, well, it's a picture of my coffee cup, so I'm not expecting a lot of likes, but I am expecting some likes and possibly comments, and I am using the hashtag to find pictures by other people from the event as well, so continued interaction, not around that.
And my understanding, sorry, I'll leave you the microphone, my understanding is that on Instagram, people use a lot more hashtags than, for example, on Twitter and stuff. Like I've seen Instagram posts with just almost like one word and then 1 million hashtags, yeah? Is that right? So that's a different way of communicating. Why do you think, I'm putting on the spot slightly here, but if anyone knows, like, why do you think people use more hashtags on Instagram? There's no right answer.
I guess it's about searching.
It's about searching. People are trying to find images. Yeah. Okay.
I think a lot of people do it to grow their accounts as well.
So it's a kind of growth hacking kind of thing. Yeah. Did anyone put it anywhere else apart from Twitter or Instagram? Did anyone just send it to a friend? Did anyone not bother sending it? Because actually, why would I do what this crazy guy in front of me is saying? Where did you send it?
Yeah, actually I posted on my Snapchat story.
You put it on your Snapchat story. Okay. And why did you choose to put it there? That's just where you tend to hang out. And could you just put that so you can hear it? Yeah, because it's just for the
family members are there.
Yeah.
So I expect them to get some reply from them or comments faster than when if I post it on Instagram or in Twitter.
Cool. So I don't use Snapchat, so I can't really, I've got no mental model really of how it works particularly. I've used it once and I just got very confused because I'm old and got grey hair. But so what kind of methods of interaction do you have on Snapchat that might be different from, say, Twitter or Instagram?
So it depends on the people you allow to see your story or your
so that's for each one. So for every time you put something on, you choose who it's going to, that kind of thing, right? Okay.
Okay.
And there's streaks, is that right? There's some kind of streak in terms of when you interact with somebody else, is that right?
It's in private. You can
contact
them in private. So in some cases, you can have like group discussion.
Yeah.
Or comment on the.
And you send it to a story which is like a public thing, or is it a?
Yeah, it's a public.
Okay. And so how can they interact with that? What can they do? Can they like it? What can they do?
They can reply to it.
Right.
Probably. And they might take a screenshot and then they can post it as well.
Right.
Use it in their Snapchat.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so what I'm trying to get at there is that all these social networks kind of limit but also promote the things that we can do in certain social spaces. And we've kind of just internalized all this and see it as entirely normal. But it constrains the kind of discourse and the kind of responses that you can have. Instagram has controversially recently brought in something where it's the equivalent of Twitter shadow banning. So let's say that I'm a complete troll, and every time Joe posts, I know Joe, so every time I post something on, Joe posts something on his Instagram account, I just put something like, that's boring, that's rubbish, whatever. After a while, Joe doesn't even have to say anything. Instagram noticed that I'm being negative, and all of a sudden, they just make it so that Joe no longer sees my comments. I still see my comments on Joe's thing, but all of a sudden, but Joe does not know, I don't know that I've been effectively banned from Joe's account. Yeah? Now, all of these things are happening without our knowledge. You know, you've seen all of the kind of Facebook, Russian election stuff and Brexit and everything like that. All of these things are affecting our democracy, and it's a function of the spaces in which we operate, and we don't know what we don't know about what's happening in the middle of our communication. So I find that really interesting. So has anyone got a response yet? Has anyone got a response, either a like or a retweet or a reply?
A like from someone from Barcelona.
You got, oh, very good, excellent. Yaz, can I just, because we haven't heard from you yet.
Actually in the room right now, apparently.
Oh, excellent. Yaz, who have you heard from?
Dan.
You've heard from Dan. And what's he, has he said something? Or has he?
He's liked it.
He's liked it.
He's liked a lot of things.
Good. Okay. Right. Great. Well, just for the sake of time, I want to move on. But what I do want to, what I.
Me too. Yeah. We connect.
Dan's got 2 more followers.
Ah, very good. Well, what I do want to say is, like, how do you know you got that response? I'm going to leave that as a rhetorical question. How do you know you got that response? Okay. Now then, I want to give you an example. And all of this thing seems pretty just like prosaic, and this is the way the world is, but I'm trying to build up towards kind of a theory of digital literacies. So how do you know you got a response? All right? Some people it's because they check their phone constantly and are pulling to refresh constantly until their battery wears out. Some people it's because they hear a notification. Now I haven't heard any notifications in the room, and if you think about the last 10 years, the amount of times that you hear a phone go off in a public space has gone diminished massively because things vibrate, etc. Now, if I get a message, I get a vibration on my wrist, yeah? And lots of people have got smart bands and smart watches and that kind of thing. So my phone is on silent all of the time, and my wrist vibrates depending on certain apps. Now, that is fine, and that's great, and I've thought through the process for that, and I've made sure that, for example, I haven't got notifications which buzz my wrist for certain apps, otherwise it would just be doing it all the time. So I choose it for certain things, my wife when she messages me, that kind of thing. And so we have to think about notifications. Notifications become kind of a skill set, like a form of literacy, that kind of thing. So I have recently started doing some work with a client, and this client uses Telegram. Now Telegram is a bit like WhatsApp or something like that. Telegram is great, and I use it with my family. So my son, who's 10, is on Telegram, my wife's on Telegram, my dad and my mum are on Telegram, everyone in my family's on Telegram, and we use it to message each other instead of kind of WhatsApp, which tracks your codes, Facebook, and kind of SMS and that kind of stuff, which is great. So every time a Telegram message comes through, my wrist vibrates. That is fantastic until I start doing some work with a client that runs its entire organization off Telegram. So I am now part of 4 or 5 Telegram channels, and every person in that organization uses Telegram instead of email to contact each other. All of a sudden, I've just been in Miami at a conference with all those people, all of a sudden my wrist is vibrating every like 10 seconds. It's insane. To the extent that I'm now probably, if I continue working with that client, I'm probably going to have to take my family off Telegram because I can't kind of slice and dice the notifications I get on Telegram. Now, this all seems like first world problems, but it's a form of kind of digital literacy and thinking about the way in which you interact in the world. This is why kind of theorizing and thinking about, it's a kind of learner experience design, isn't it? It's you thinking about how your learners are going to operate in a certain space, right from the kind of big academic stuff, right down to if they get too many notifications, they're going to turn notifications off, and then you have no way of interacting with them. You have to scaffold their attention. That's what you need to do. So when it comes to identifying digital literacies, it's an ongoing process. New things come out all the time. It means that you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to think about the rhetorics of online spaces, how you're expecting people to interact, whether the default things that come with a social network or learning management system, whatever it's going to be, whether they're the kinds of things which are going to create the discourse that you want. You have to start thinking about these things and not just accepting things off the shelf. Now, Alan Martin said more than a decade ago that digital literacy is not a threshold, it's not something to get, it's not a bar to get to over which you're now digitally literate. Digital literacy is a condition, it's a way of being. All right? So it's an attitude, it's an approach to the world. Because we would think it was ridiculous, wouldn't we, if someone got a Microsoft Office qualification 15 years ago and they said, well, I'm digitally literate, like now and for all time. Yeah? These things evolve and change over time. So digital literacy isn't a condition, it's a threshold. And also, and this is UNESCO in 2004, they've realized, like we said in terms of media being not just text, but kind of images and audio and all that kind of stuff, they said that, literacy is the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute, and that literacy involves a continuum of learning and enabling individuals to achieve their goals, to develop their knowledge and potential, and to participate fully in their community and wider society. So all of a sudden, literacy isn't just the ability to read and write texts offline, it's now the ability to read and write texts in a kind of postmodern sense, online and offline, and use that to participate in kind of civil discourse and civil society. So it's a much wider, much more complex, big area of literacy, which is changing all the time. It becomes a lot more complex to keep up. So the work, I wrote my doctoral thesis on digital literacies, and what I found during that process is exactly that digital literacy is too small a notion, really, because what we're talking about is a multitude and a multiplicity of digital literacies. So if you work in one particular context, it might be HE, it might be for a bank, it might be whatever it is, there might be some core basic skills that are common to those roles, but actually there are so many different digital literacies that we can't just talk about one single digital literacy to kind of rule them all. It's a plurality of digital literacies. And the other thing is that digital literacies are all about context. So you might work in one context, in one country, in one sector, and think you know all of the things there are to know about the digital literacies, the way you need to interact in certain online spaces. And then you might move somewhere else, like my dad moved to the Middle East towards the end of his career. All of a sudden, completely different way of interacting, completely different way of recognizing people. Last night, I was staying at a friend's house. We had a kind of small dinner party, and we were talking about emojis and how, when it's appropriate to use them in emails, and like, do you use them to your boss and all that kind of stuff. It becomes like a negotiated kind of discourse where you're not really sure where the edges are, and you just have to have a go and see how we're going to figure it out. So there's a million different digital literacy frameworks out there. I typed in digital literacy framework into my favorite search engine, which is DuckDuckGo, because they don't track you. And it comes up with all of these things here. There's, I recognize some of them, like that's JISC, for example.